Hello, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 2 of the ESG Experience, the podcast about all things ESG and beyond. Whether you're an ESG expert or just dipping your toes into the ESG universe, this podcast is for you. Together, we'll navigate the alphabet soup of ESG, share strategies, and discuss industry news and trends. I'm Helee Lev, SVP of ESG Operations at Conservice.
And I'm Ryan Nelson, SVP and General Manager of ESG at Conservice.
So today we are delighted to be joined by, I believe, the one and only. I have never met another Rex Raimond, and I appreciate the alliteration of your name, by the way, as a HH for most of my life. Director of Transformational Investing in Food Systems, TIFS for short, to discuss investment in food systems, how food systems can help transform the ESG regime, and why investors need to coordinate with the community to increase finances within these food systems. I'm personally thrilled about this topic. As I mentioned during our introductions here, it's not something that we tend to cover as far as our scope, talking with mostly commercial real estate owners, but it's important and it matters and it's interesting above and beyond that. So, okay, Rex, this is the part where I embarrass you a little bit. No one can see your face blushing, but I'm going to read about all of your notable accomplishments that landed you on our fine podcast today. So Rex is the Director of Transformational Investing in Food Systems. TIFS partners with foundations, family offices, and other investors to build a movement for investing in just and sustainable food systems. He has more than 20 years of experience developing strategies and building effective partnerships for sustainable and equitable systems. He's worked on many aspects of food and agricultural systems transformation, including sustainable finance, crop insurance, and agricultural policy, incentives for soil health, sustainable supply chains, food safety, and climate change. Rex is also an international environmental lawyer. He's from the Netherlands, but now lives in Colorado in the US. His other international experience includes South Africa, the United Kingdom, and Zimbabwe. So what's the best place of all these fine places you've lived? Gun to your head, you have to just pick one.
I'm happy where I live now, outside Boulder, Colorado. It's pretty awesome to be close to the Rocky Mountains and just go out there and explore. I think it saved our mental health during COVID.
I love it.
That's great. Yeah, the Rocky Mountains are something, aren't they? Like just a force to kind of behold and view, and there's something just interesting about a huge rock like that right in front of you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's accessible too. You know, I grew up in the Netherlands right by the ocean. You got to have a boat to go and explore. That's not for everybody, but the mountains you can just wander off and go and explore.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, again, welcome, Rex. This is very important and cool stuff that you're doing. I don't talk about or worry about age or anything, but looking at your profile, I'd be like, what are you, 120 years old with all the things that you've accomplished? And, you know, I think you were at one particular place for a long time. So, yeah, incredible. Seems like an incredible professional, personal journey that you've been on. Doing all these things. One thing I'll mention, if you could tell me a little bit about it, maybe to start. I really got excited. I think this is really only the second time I've talked to someone about this concept of system level investing. If we could just touch on that, because I don't know that that's a term that just everyone automatically knows. I looked it up. It says system level investing has emerged in recent years as a holistic approach to put investment and non-investment activities together, typically for mitigating risks, things like climate change and that. So is that right? Is that what system level investing is? And is that what you're doing?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of newer, I think, in concept, but it's essentially about kind of taking a holistic view towards your financial and non-financial returns. You know, all investment has impact, but often we focus on only certain impacts. I'm really aware of kind of generating data about what those returns are, and we forget about a whole bunch of other things. So there are always unintended consequences. You know, maybe somebody is focused on climate resilience in their investment strategy and risk management strategy. But then, especially so in the context of food and food systems, that can kind of push us towards certain investments, right? In recent years, alternative proteins, so alternatives to meat, have come up as a major strategy and an opportunity for investors to invest in innovation. And it's become, and then often by focusing on a particular silo, we can have unintended consequences around, for kind of certain types of soils, for instance. It's actually really beneficial to have rotational grazing of livestock. So you can manage livestock in ways that generates lots of co-benefits for biodiversity, for kind of water infiltration in soils. So that's the idea of systems investing or systems level investing, is that we take a holistic look at positive and negative returns that occur in an investment. And there may still be some unintended negative consequences, but at least it helps us be aware of those, and as an investor, it could drive some kind of creation of new and innovative solutions.
Yeah, I get it. So just putting that concept out there that we're going to be system level or holistic in our approach, make sure that we're asking the right questions and considering all the opportunities. That's great. So tell us a little bit, how are investors or are investors redirecting private commercial investments in food systems? Are we actively, is there some sort of movement now, or are we more actively looking at long-term strategies and more efficient allocation, or is it same old, decade after decade, or are we seeing some step change improvement?
Yeah, I think it's still somewhat early days. We've gone through kind of sustainable food systems, and now there's a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture and regenerative food systems. And we're, I think, as a sector, still trying to figure out what we mean by that. But what's kind of really interesting about this sector, it touches on a lot of themes that are important to asset owners, asset allocators, the investment community at large, and some of the risk that they're trying to mitigate. So in the context of food systems, we're looking at how do food systems contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, to biodiversity loss, to income inequality, racial justice. There are so many of these themes that are really important to many investors that kind of come together in the context of food systems. They're both a contributor to these challenges, but it's also the place where we can find a lot of the solutions. And that, I think, is really what's starting to take hold. So when people are talking about regenerative food and ag, it's not just about the way the food or the ingredients are produced, doing that with less chemical inputs, chemical fertilizer, using practices that improve soils and improve nutrition. But it's also about who benefits. Do the farmers get a good deal? Do the workers? There's so much. There's a lot of labor in food and agriculture. So do they get fairly treated and get a good deal? So that takes us into the financing models and the business models that are, I think, are innovative and are part of that larger concept of regeneration. And it touches, like I said, on a lot of different ESG themes.
I like that. And I appreciate that you're looking at, the system holistically. So like you said, it's not just about the food produced, but it's about the people involved and that kind of thing. And that's, I think, the true nature of an impact initiative, right? Is that it's not just about any one facet. You're looking at kind of the whole 360 view of what goes into it. So that being said, I want to ask, to what extent is it the different kind of businesses' responsibility? Is this their purview? So one example I'm thinking of, so as we mentioned, or as our listeners know, we at Conservice ESG, we're primarily working with commercial real estate owners, a lot of multifamily real estate owners, and processing and paying their utility bills, as well as using that information for purposes of ESG reporting, both voluntary and involuntary. So that in and of itself, you could run an ESG program. You could say, I own commercial real estate, or I operate commercial real estate, and it's my purview to report on my emissions and run my buildings responsibly. We have one customer who thinks it's beyond it's part of their purview. So beyond just what I'd consider the conventional scope of managing and operating a building and looking at KPIs like energy, water, waste. But they say, okay, so we manage residential buildings and we have purview over a lot of residents. And residents eat food and use food and source food and waste food, most importantly. And they've looked to implement programs and have been successful in actually taking that under their wing as like helping to facilitate where the extra food goes and make sure that there's not waste and make sure there's avenues to get that food to folks who need it. Because food waste, I remember one stat I read, it's something like 71% of food that goes into a household is wasted in some way, whether that's it rots in your refrigerator and gets thrown away, or you cook it, but you just don't finish your plate or something, but it was a staggering percentage. So my point being, in your opinion, how much is it the responsibility of a business, say like a commercial real estate owner operator, to really dig in and lean in a little bit and get involved in, food procurement, food waste, and reallocation of food as a resource?
I think it is a great opportunity for these kind of real estate kind of owners. Like you said, on the waste side, kind of managing those waste streams and keeping food waste out of landfills would be a big contributor to managing your ESG footprint. So kind of looking at the climate impacts, just the climate impacts, that all that food waste, all that food was produced somewhere, and both the transportation, the chemical inputs that are used, maybe the land conversion, contributes to kind of greenhouse gas emissions. So in order to, if we can reduce that, that also reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So and it can be a valuable resource. So in some countries, there's now a lot of talk about circular economies. And we see some of these examples in my own backyard in Colorado. One of my friends she actually runs a food truck. She started as a food truck. It's now becoming a big business, but it's taking food, a combination of unconsumed food, but also food ingredients that weren't sold by farmers, kind of taking them and then reprocessing them either into food that can still be sold to people, or going back into a feed stream for local cattle or other livestock. So there's opportunities to create kind of value with that, kind of with food that's not consumed. But I think for these owners, it's also really interesting to start looking at what kind of food do the tenants have access to, and are they in an area where there's kind of ready access to healthy foods? Actually, if we're looking at some of our work is around applying true cost accounting, and that's a way of grappling with these kind of systemic issues. So true cost accounting methodologies for actually quantifying the positive and negative externalities of food systems. And if you look at one of the biggest negative externalities of food systems occurs in the form of non-communicable diseases, so diet-related disease, especially in the US. And that has a lot to do, that's part of our food system, right? That is the kind of food that we have access to. What's the cheapest food? What's what's more expensive? What takes more time to prepare? And do we even know how to prepare or have to take the time to prepare fresh foods? And that is, I think, an opportunity that these real estate owners could really leverage to start offering and looking for ways to bring in business that offers access to healthy foods for their tenants. So I would look at both ends, both on access to healthy foods and reducing food waste as opportunities.
And one follow-up question to that. So there's certainly opportunities, right? Like they could do it. What's the motivation to, right? Is
Right.
there some sort of like financial bottom line? How do you motivate folks to do that other than out of the goodness of their hearts? Or, in the case of the customer I'm thinking of, it's something they include in like their CSR report or something like that. Like why would people do this? Does it cost them or does
Right.
it actually save money?
That's so I'm not quite sure I'm going to have the definitive answer on that question, but it's a great one to explore. I am not quite sure what kind of expenses these real estate owners have for the for managing the waste stream. But if there are, I would think that you could reduce those costs by connecting with a waste handler who has access or kind of turns food waste into something that's of value.
So it's like a cost avoidance of what you'd have to pay someone
Yeah,
to haul away. Okay.
that would be my and then the other thing is that I think affects the value of the real estate itself is proximity to various services, right? So if there's good access to healthy food providers, I would imagine that would have some beneficial impacts on the value of the real estate.
Yeah, and I think there's a whole slew of folks out there combating like food deserts and things like that. And
Exactly.
I won't butcher any stats, but the stats on that are also staggering if you start looking into where the food deserts are and really how hard it is for some folks to have access to healthy food, like you said.
Right, exactly.
Well, and I'd like to suggest that as consumers, we are maybe maturing and becoming more responsible, actually. I don't know if you want to call it younger people or perhaps, but they appreciate an organization, a living space, a business that considers those things. So, if it's the innovators or the cutting edge ones that want to figure it out and invest in it and figure out, proximity to food, how to handle waste properly, all of that, someone might be more willing to want to live there, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
just knowing that is part of the community that they're moving into is very valuable. I literally at this stage, I know people are willing to pay more. I mean, people are selecting add $5 to my energy bill so to go to green sources. Like literally people who I mean they're doing it. So I think it's important, and it can be a differentiator for a business.
I think that consumer demand, I think all the research that I'm seeing, consumer research, is that kind of younger generations are interested in where their food comes from, that it's sustainably produced, that workers are treated fairly. It's definitely an influence on why companies are responding to that demand.
Yeah, I think I just saw an article. I'm gonna just headline this one, but someone's finally suing Minnesota based on some constitutional rights now about the client. Like young people have actually figured out a case they can make because they're not living up to their constitutional commitment that they made. I think it was Minnesota, if I may. But anyway, stuff like that's going to start happening. But so I understand that the organization TIFS is an initiative or is part of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food to some extent. Maybe tell us a little bit about that relationship and make sure maybe we haven't gotten enough into exactly what you do as part of TIFS or what the Global Alliance. Maybe you could walk us through a successful program or project or report.
Yeah. So Global Alliance for the Future of Food is it's a consortium of charitable foundations. They're mostly based in the US and in Europe. They all have grant-making programs that are in one way or another related to food systems and sustainability. And they started working together a decade ago to really learn alongside each other about what does food system transformation actually mean? What is the process of transformation? What are we transforming to? And in the course of that work, the question came up, how do we as grant makers bring our investment teams along in this work? And that was really the ask to our initiative. How do I identify pathways for both mission investors, so the impact investors of foundations, as well as their investment teams that invest the large endowments that generate the returns that are then given away in the form of grants? How do we help those investment teams identify opportunities that still going to meet their return requirements, but also start to move capital financial capital towards businesses and investment funds that are trying to create all these co-benefits, these impact benefits alongside financial returns. And that is kind of one of the things that we've done is related to this true cost accounting. So how do you take a really complex academic evaluation framework and make that manageable for an investment officer to sort of screen investments for their positive and negative returns? So we do some of that methodology development. It's sort of ESG plus or ESG plus plus in a way. And then and we look for concrete examples. So we're really kind of looking for the inspiring examples that are currently maybe still small and maybe not so directly relevant to most investors because they haven't been around long enough. They're not big enough yet, but they kind of show you where the private sector may be heading. And that's what's been exciting about our work. And we do that both with investment funds as well as with companies. So on the fund side, there's, for instance, the Fair Food Fund, kind of picking up on some of the themes that we were discussing, started in Detroit with really low-income communities, food deserts, if you will. And they started putting some different tools together, like how do you subsidize people that rely on food stamps to use those food stamps and use them at a farmer's market, for instance, to get fresh organic fruit and vegetables, instead of having to spend them on kind of cheap, highly processed food in a local supermarket, if they, if there are some. And then what they did beyond that was to really encourage entrepreneurship in those same neighborhoods. So you create these synergistic effects of people have a little bit money to spend on food by, they call it, the program is called Double Up Food Bucks. And you encourage local entrepreneurship for kind of food businesses in particular, and you start to invest really in the economic development of the community, but you do it through food. So that's an example of the kind of fund that we would sort of use our tools to screen them, highlight them in our work, and then see what could be done next to grow these kinds of initiatives to where they have exponential impact. We did the same with companies. We have different tools for them, and again, we're looking for companies that are really doing something innovative to tackle some really difficult challenges. And one of those companies that we highlighted in a report last year was Organically Grown company in Oregon in the U.S. that is basically an aggregator of fruits and vegetables from organic farmers in Oregon. They bulk it and sell it to supermarkets and wholesalers. They went way beyond just the organic production, so the quality of the food itself. And they're one of the early examples of a steward ownership company, and that's of interest to us as well. And I think kind of maybe to your listeners, this is becoming a movement in the U.S. This has been happening in Europe in particular. There's some really well-established old companies that use this model in Europe, but you're starting to see this in the U.S. as well. Patagonia is a company that most people will know. They took on this steward ownership model, but what it allows you to do is to embed the company in a legal trust and to then set certain requirements and conditions for who benefits from the profit that this company makes. So who benefits from the company's success? And with Organically Grown, they have what they call a profit waterfall. So percentage of the profit goes back into the company, percentage goes to the workers, percentage goes to the farmers that are supplying to the company. Some percentage is reinvested in community projects, and then of course kind of some percentage goes to the investors as well. But you create a legal structure and a business structure where everybody benefits from the company's success. So everybody's also invested in making sure that this company is continues to be successful, because that's to everyone's benefit. And that, again, it's sort of this really interesting example of if I don't know if any of your subscribers read Impact Alpha. It's kind of a source of impact investing news that I like to track.
They might now.
They might know.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a cool resource. But they're starting to I'm starting to see more and more investors, including some of the largest private capital funds in the US, bringing this model of steward ownership to the companies that they're investing in. So I think that's one to watch, and that doesn't, that goes beyond food and agriculture. That's really applicable to any sector, and it's really a part of, I think, a solution set or a toolkit for using a capitalist model in which everybody benefits from commercial success.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're almost reinventing capitalism, which, some would argue, many would argue, is not a perfect system by any means. So yeah, you're kind of addressing some of the issues there. I will share a story. It's a regret. I'm going to share a regret. I don't have many of them, so hopefully this doesn't come back to bite me. But you studied law, right, Rex? Is that?
Yeah, that's right.
True? Also, okay, good. And so I understand that you set up the organization a certain way so you can make these rules. So way back when, in another life, we were interested in a company I started in becoming a certified B Corp. Are you familiar with certified B Corps at all? Yeah. And I thought that was a cool thing to do. I understood, the concept, and it allows you, or empowers you, or forces you to make decisions that might not be based on just the financial performance for the shareholders, because you have these other parameters that you say, well, we also in our bylaws are committing to this, and this being part of the considerations of the things we made. But here's the regret. I was advised that by doing something like that, later down the road, when you go to take investments, someone might see that and then not want to invest in you, right? So you might limit the pool of potential investors, because they're going to say, well, this organization is more than just financially driven for the results of the shareholders. So that's concerning to me, how they might use one of these bylaws for their do-gooder stuff or whatever it is. So we did not end up doing it then. We've gone on to do much more impactful things that I feel good about. But yeah, we passed on that because of that legal restriction. And I feel like people are willing to do that. Like, I wouldn't pass on it now at all. Like, people are very willing to consider stewardship models and certified B Corp and things like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm sure there are investors who would pass on
No
a
doubt.
structure like that, but I think it's becoming kind of better understood, and especially in sectors like food and ag, where this is a sector where that relies heavily on long-term relationships. Some of the big companies in food and ag, their biggest concern at the moment is the resilience of their supply into the future, and these kinds of structures can really be helpful in that context as well. Kind of weather some of the storms, like we saw during COVID, when kind of major supply chains were breaking down. The ones that were still functioning were functioning because of strong relationships between all the different players. So these are kind of legal structures that I think just express existing relationships and incentivize companies and partners to invest in those relationships.
So I might ask you, shifting gears a little bit. I think one commonality we share is that we're all working for kind of a mission-based organization, right? We're not just here trying to print money. There's definitely an element of impact or wanting to work towards a greater mission. So I'd ask you personally, how did you get involved in this space specifically, or how did it pique your interest initially? And what has been just a most rewarding aha moment for you where something just came together nicely and you're like, and this is why I do this because of this? Like, I'd love to hear more of your story.
Yeah. For me, so I studied international environmental law, and international law there's no Leviathan enforcing those laws. It all depends on the willingness of countries and organizations to abide by a set of sort of a moral code. And so that idea of collaboration is really ingrained in that in that sort of body of law. And then I started early on after college, spent a year in Zimbabwe in some rural areas, and it's all connected. Like why people were struggling sometimes to be able to buy food or grow enough food was directly related to how the land was managed and what kind of land they ended up settling on after the colonial period. That was kind of more, just poorer farm soil than their traditional lands, and causing erosion and things like that. So kind of poverty, hunger, economic development, it's all tied together. And for me, it all kind of came together in the context of food and agriculture. So kind of fast forward kind of many years later, done a whole bunch of work on sort of policy and the role of the private sector and companies and the role of impact investors. It's kind of, for me, what's most exciting is to work alongside people who are actually doing the work of kind of building companies and not willing to give up on their ideals. And so one of those examples is a CEO of a company. His name is Dale Lewis. He runs a company in Zambia, of all places, called Community Markets for Conservation. He's been at it for 20 years. This company is growing tremendously. They now work with 250,000 small-scale farmers. They have a really high-quality range of products that they're bringing to market that are affordable for local consumers. They're producing them kind of without any chemical inputs. They're boosting the productivity of the land with these really kind of diverse range of crops that they intercrop and rotate. And the starting point for him, though, was elephant conservation. So again, it ties it all together, right? It's all related. People were killing elephants because they didn't have any other source of livelihood. They were displaced from parks that were made national parks for wildlife conservation. They needed an alternative. There was nobody was going to helping them create that alternative. They were creating it to the best possibility for themselves. And this company, of course, together with many other partners, has been building a model that works, that is economically viable, that gives employment to lots of people, that kind of produces food in harmony with nature. For me, it was just both amazing to be able to visit the company and see their operations, meet with some of their farmers last year, and in the course of this year, just helping to give exposure to new investors. That has led to some new investments in that company that allowed them to continue to grow. So those are, that's kind of shows me that we can be entrepreneurial, and we can run profitable businesses, and we can do tons of great things for people and society.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a great story. We might have to introduce you to a VC we used to work with. They have an agro and food tech fund investing in the future for agro and food. You reminded me to talk a little bit about resiliency and and some of the sustainable solutions that you that those companies are coming up with. So I guess the idea is, if I can kind of summarize, we believe that sustainable food is achievable, even in particular places where it's not happening. It just takes intelligent design, know-how that maybe someone else has that isn't currently in a particular location, with some innovation, accepting the fact that the climate is changing and how does that impact things. So how do we build the next system? One story it reminded me of was some person who was growing oranges in Florida and was paying close attention and goes, I think oranges are actually going to grow better in Georgia now, and like actually moved. And for who knows how long, people are going to be sitting in Florida as probably orange crop starts to get worse and worse. But someone is thinking innovatively and accepting the situation and able to position themselves to be more resilient and whatever. So yeah, the resiliency and the innovative approach to this is, I guess, a hopeful kind of thing.
Or there's another concept I read about, and this was completely in a futuristic fictional book and would never actually happen, but it was an interesting idea of like, if someone actually starts policing the fact. So the example in the book was like, no one in in the United States, I think it was in California, should have bananas, because bananas are all coming from like Central and South America, and it's an absolutely ridiculous carbon footprint to get that banana to this breakfast table. And therefore in this area, they're just going to outlaw bananas, or they're going to, the way they did it is they shame people who ate bananas publicly so that no one wanted to eat a banana anymore, because they exposed, how terrible this really was, and argued that like, why do you need bananas? Just eat what's here. So I liked it in the book as like an idea or a concept, but obviously that was just demonstrating an extreme measure of trying to police it that would like never really happen. But it played that out in a few different scenarios, but that was the food example, which was just kind of interesting to think about of like, yeah, how bad, like, do I really need this banana? Like, are bananas that important for how far they travel or what they're worth? Or should I just be eating things around here and be fine with it?
Yeah. There is definitely a regulatory pressure. So the European Union just they have some regulations go into effect that ban any kind of import of food and timber related to deforestation in tropical forests. So and a lot of there's a lot of beef imports that are either feed or the cattle themselves are raised in areas that have been cleared in the Amazon region. So it's not too far-fetched anymore that there could be regulations that ban certain types of imports.
Agreed. I grew up in this is regret number 2, I guess. I grew up in the day of the concept was someone told me, and I believed it when I was young. It's like, you're in America. You can have a banana whenever you want one, anywhere, anytime. Someone tried to teach me about seasonal food, and they said, you don't have to worry about that or whatever. And I just was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I just get whatever I want. We have the technology. And it was some time before I actually thought about seasonal type things. And I never used to, literally I would eat. It was probably weird the way I would eat, because people would be like, that's way out of season. And now I'm like total opposite. I'm hook, line, and sinker for themes, like, what month is it? What am I supposed to be eating now? Like that's what I want to participate in, and that's what I want to do. But that's not the way we thought.
I'm actively undoing the wrongs of your childhood and upbringing. No offense to Ryan's parents, who I'm sure avidly listen to this podcast, but I'm explaining to my kids and they're like, I want a peach. I'm like, well, it's November and there are no peaches. So trying to teach that.
Exactly.
Adversity,
there is a lot of potential. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for strengthening those regional food systems. And that's kind of part of what we underinvested in as countries, as a result of this amazing global system and access to blueberries and strawberries from Chile during the winter months here. That has opened up and created this kind of huge diverse food basket that we have access to in the U.S. And it has also led to this sort of large consolidation in this global food system and an underinvestment in regional food systems. And I think that's coming back.
Yeah.
That there's
I think it's coming back in like a
reinvestment.
cutesy, trendy way of like shop local and go to your farmer's market and buy a bunch of flowers, but it feels more like a cutesy, fun activity than like actually a way of life at this point. Maybe at some point through regulation or disaster, we'll find our ways where it will be required. Or but one thing I'll say too that kind of drives me towards it, like if you eat the stuff in the region when it's fresh, like it's a noticeably better, like if I come back from like Florida or the Caribbean, I don't even want to eat fruit in Chicago. Like it's depressing to even try. Like I'd rather just have something that's from here that might actually taste good. But I guess it's not enough of a deterrent because bananas are a staple in my life.
I think so. Yeah, that's awesome. There's something that I think will change markets is the sort of the research that is showing how the health of the soil, especially the soil microbiome, so all the microbial life in soils feeds the plants, and you're starting to see this research that is showing that plants that are grown in these really healthy soils, microbe-rich soils, actually have a lot more nutrient density, and that they react to the gut microbiome in a much better way. And I think that there's a lot of work now, again, something to watch, about that connection and how that translates into value and a value proposition for the consumer, especially as we're starting to be more focused on preventing diet-related disease. These kinds of findings and this kind of research could start to change consumer behavior and then kind of work its way down the supply chain. In the more the cutesy end of things and trying to think about the kind of your clients. There's a group in the Netherlands that has been working with intentional communities where tenants or homeowners in a neighborhood, they get together and they buy a piece of farmland, and then they give a job to a farmer to farm that land and grow the food for that community. So that's a very direct connection to the land and to where your food is coming from. But it's an interesting way of reconceiving those relationships. That
you'd have to have like the perfect, like that couldn't work in the dense urban.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
We had talked about, Ryan and I were talking the other day about like, what do you do with all these office buildings, right? So we have like in downtown Chicago, just all this empty office space, right? And they're building more, of course. It's like, what is the next iteration, like version 2.0 of office? And like, I don't know, like some sort of gardening, hydroponic gardening or vertical gardening would be really cool, especially in an urban setting. But yeah, somebody has to believe in it, invest in it, do it.
Yeah, exactly. Those models have been tried. They got a lot of attention and a lot of investment the last few years, but they're also finding that it's actually very expensive to retool those spaces for office space for growing food. So it's actually turns out that it's hard to make that pencil out financially. But it's an interesting idea to bring food back into the lives of the urban dwellers.
Yeah, note that for your thesis, Helee. That's a hurdle I have to clear there. It turns out to be expensive.
I know we'll have to clear it.
Quick thought. I wanted to get your thoughts, Rex. You mentioned meat alternatives earlier. I guess less natural, less organic, maybe more science-based, whatever you want to call it. Although it all is. What do you think? What's your opinion? Good.
There's a role for
working
it.
On this, or yeah.
There's a role for it for sure. It's kind of part of the big picture. As long as we also are cognizant. So part of the driver is to replace a lot of the livestock that has such a big climate impact and biodiversity impact, because we're converting so much land from indigenous ecosystems to now have space to grow livestock. We just have to be mindful and careful about what we're putting in our bodies as well, and that this kind of lab grown or alternative proteins aren't just another version of highly processed food that our bodies just don't really know how to process and turn into nutrition. So I would say there's good to watch. Really interesting to see how investment is kind of flowing to that space of lab-grown meat and other types of protein alternatives. But I think there'll be a role for it, but it won't replace the entire kind of protein supply chain. It's fine to eat, good to eat lentils and peas as well. Just the unprocessed plant-based proteins. Those are great for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's part of the cultural and change, which is happening too. So hopefully that'll meet in time for the needs.
Okay, so I have to ask you, Rex, we all have heard of vegetarians, we've heard of vegans, omnivores, more in the animal world. Have you heard of a flexitarian? Is that a concept?
I have.
Aha, he has. He just validated it, Ryan.
But my issue now that we're gonna.
So I'm a self-proclaimed flexitarian, meaning I can go many meals without meat. It's totally normal. I could go days without eating meat, not care, and then I don't know, every now and again there'll be like a steak, and I'll be like, yeah, great. So I'm a flexitarian, and Ryan tells me that's kind of a BS concept. Ryan, as a proclaimed vegetarian, tells me that's kind of a BS concept.
I mean, the idea was if someone skips meat at one meal, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a flexitarian. Look at me, like I don't really understand what it's in like a Mises situation, like what is the difference between you and a non-flexitarian? And I guess what we concluded was if you're not a flexitarian, that means you literally eat an animal at 3 meals a day. Is that what we're saying? And then a flexitarian is someone who maybe skips an animal eating in one of those, or what?
Clear it up, Rex. Put it to bed.
Yes.
I'm just making this up on the spot, but I was thinking of flexitarians as somebody who is intentional about reducing the amount of meat that they eat.
Fine. Exactly. Intentional is the buzzword.
Not a concept, an intentional decision I make at every sitting, whether or not I'm going to eat an animal.
I can't wait. Much like paradigm is kind of a dated business term. I can't wait until intentional and adjacent start to wear down a little bit. Everything's adjacent to something right now.
Right.
Yeah, right. But they're useful. But all right. Well, that brings us adjacent on our agenda here is the game we need to play before we wrap up real quickly, which I've never been more stoked about this game because I'll tell you the story in a minute. But it's called Barley or Beans. All right. All you have to do, Rex, is guess what the input is. I'm going to tell you the name of a company, and you just say, basically, are they making coffee or are they making beer? Is their product barley or beans? Okay. It's called Toast.
Okay.
Barley or beans. That's all I got to say. One of those 2 words.
Barley.
That's right. That's right. But listen to this. I plugged this in for 2 seconds. I was trying to find something on topic. So Toast is a 6-minute walk from the University of London, where you went.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
They don't actually use barley, actually, because they're two do-gooders. But you still win because you got it right. They make beer, but they actually use surplus bread instead. But their whole thing, right on their thing, it said, "We give all profits to charity, not shareholders. We fund systemic change to fix the food system." Like this wasn't a popular thing necessarily. I normally I search for like half an hour to find a legitimate. The first thing I found, I just looked for a brewery near the University of London, and I came up with Toast, whose headline is "We fund systemic change." So they're literally making beer to make profit to fix food systems.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Toast.
Yes.
It's the most spot-on one I've ever gotten.
Trip to London.
Toast. Yeah, let's go have an ale at Toast. Although I'm slightly interested in non-barley beer that's made from surplus bread, but
right.
I'm not that picky. Great.
That's awesome.
That's all we got. Anything else?
Okay.
Congrats on your win. Although it's a 50-50 chance, sometimes 33. Many people don't get it right. So good for you. You win.
Great.
Yeah,
I'm taking this one with me.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rex. And thank you to our listeners. This has been another episode of the ESG Experience podcast. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed your time with us, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. There's a new episode every month. And if you do want to continue the conversation between episodes, follow us on your favorite social media channel at #ESG Experience. Rex, hope to see you. Let us know if you're ever passing through Chicago.
Thanks so much for the conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Rex. I agree. Thanks, everyone.